Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Chaos Magic Mysteries and Mayhem. This is your host Steve, aka Dreaming Crow, aka Sominous Dread Raven. Okay, today we're going to be doing some book reviews on the practices of Vampyre Magick. I got at least 2 videos here for you on that. One's going to be my 3 runner-ups to my selection of Vampyre Magick books that I've been reading as of late, say for like the last month or 2, give or take, along with some practices there. And then I will be doing one additional voiceover video with my top pick, what I am recommending here at this point. So with that, folks, boys and girls, go ahead, buckle up, get a drink, and get seated, and we're going to get moving with the video here. All right, folks. So, for those of you who are not aware, I did change the name of this channel to Chaos Magic Mysteries and Mayhem as of late. There is a link here on the screen to my new Facebook page for my YouTube channel. If you're interested and want to join that group, go ahead. Follow that link there over to Facebook and click on the invite button there. And we'll get you going. I did provide this Facebook page for all of my subscribers, so that way we can all kind of like meet in one place. If anybody has questions or comments in regards to their practices, by all means go ahead over there to the Facebook page, throw it into the comments. I do encourage everyone to provide feedback, of course. Do be professional about it. Don't be a dick. Okay. Don't want to see anyone like quitting because somebody was unprofessional or just being a jerk. All right. Also, by all means, go ahead and share your experiences over there as well. I'd love to hear that, and we'll see what gets going on here. Of course, if you are new to my channel, I do welcome you, and I do encourage you to hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell. Anytime I put out new videos and content, you will be alerted to that. And if you are a returning member to my channel, I appreciate you coming back. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get into today's book reviews. All right. If I talk a little bit jittery here, folks, I do apologize. I've been drinking quite a bit of coffee as of late this morning, so just kind of bear with me a little bit. All right, so today's book reviews, again, are going to be on Vampyre Magick. And this will be consisting of at least 2 videos in this series. The first video that we're doing here is going to consist of my 3 runner-up books. I'm going to talk a little bit about those as far as like what I liked about them, what I didn't like, and of course where you can get them and a little bit of information about them. And then we will do a second video on my top pick, again along with some follow-up notes there, of course. Before we actually get into the reviews, I do want to go ahead and point out that these 3 books on Vampyre Magick and practices are based on psychic vampirism. Okay, there is none of these books contain practices on sanguine vampirism, and most books written on vampirism as of late will most assuredly stress the dangers that come with practicing sanguine vampire practices. Also, this is not a all comprehensive list concerning vampire practices and vampire magic. There are quite a bit more out there. Most notably, I have not reviewed any books by Father Sebastian up to this point in time. I may do some of those in the future, but at this point, I have not focused on any of his works. Also, do note the spelling vampire is spelled with a Y, Vampyre. And this is to distinguish the occult practice of vampirism to the traditional idea of vampires that are spelled with an I, found in folklore and other tales. Although there are some overlapping of ideas and principles and practices between the two, we are solely focusing on occult practice and occult vampirism and magic, and not in folklore and folk tales. Right, so I just want to go ahead and point out, of course, that back in 2021 in October, I did attend a podcast with some additional members from the Lords of Chaos, and I do believe we were doing a interview with a person who has stated that they were practicing a form of psychic vampirism back then. I believe it was called Interview with the Psychic Vampire. And I think that was actually on the Far Side of Midnight podcast, if I'm not mistaken. Now, while of course I didn't partake very much into the actual interview process there, I was, not objecting the idea of psychic vampires, but I didn't know a whole lot regarding vampire practices at that time, but it did intrigue me for a little bit of time. So that was like one of the reasons why I went ahead and found, a number of books that I wanted to go ahead and read on and jump into and, get like a little bit more of an idea regarding those practices. Now, of course, growing up, I think back in the mid or late 90s, was probably about the first time that I actually started to hear the term, psychic vampire. And that term kind of meant a lot of things to a lot of people back then. But more or less, I think it was meant to describe a person. You get that feeling, you get that person that just kind of like sucks the energy out of a room. A person who just kind of like feeds off of people's emotions and auric fields, and when they enter a room, it just seems like all the energy is like gone, But then as soon as they leave, things seem to like approach normalcy after that. Again, not It kind of intrigued me back then, but of course it did go ahead and give a little bit of a negative connotation to the idea of psychic vampires, and we still have a lot of those types in the practice. I do know of a few psychic vampires that are actually do kind of use their practice for healing in a sense. They kind of use it in order to take negative emotions away from an individual so that they can end up feeling better, and they end up transmuting that energy for their own purposes and needs later on. However, today's vampire practitioners are changing. They're kind of changing their practices a little bit, and they're kind of getting a little more stealthy in their approach as far as their methods of acquiring energy or draining energy from their target, and how they go ahead and employ those tools. All right, so Now, of course, they could go ahead and employ a variety of tactics in order to take a person's energy either willingly or unwillingly. And a lot of these practices, again, they have evolved and changed a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of go over some of those a little bit here. And they usually include touch draining. That is a very common practice, and in fact is usually one of the very first methods that a lot of vampire magic practitioners do develop and utilize simply by either brushing up against you or touching you on the shoulder or something like that. It's usually just kind of quick, and most people usually think nothing of it. Of course, it's not to say that that's meant to harm you in any way, but it's kind of like a way that they might utilize that in order to kind of get a taste of your energy at that point, for instance. You also do have things like distance draining, both line of sight and through visualization. You also do have draining of energy through auric fields, either like in an immediate vicinity as well as line of sight. And when I explain that one, it's more kind of like, they kind of like might be in a room somewhere, a dance club or something like that. They're just kind of like watching the scene, but then they're also kind of scanning the dance floor and the people that are sitting around, and they're just kind of bringing energy, and they're just drawing energy from the general area. And again, this is often accomplished through pranic breath, is one of the more common practices for this, as well as there is a use of tendrils, which are usually grown and developed through the vampire's auric field. And again, these tendrils are often used through either line of sight as well as visualization as well. Which brings me to the final two types of methods that vampire magic practitioners utilize, and that is astral travel and shape shifting, and then finally dream work. And that just pretty much sounds exactly what it sounds like. A lot of vampire magic is relies on the individual to develop their astral travel ability, and during this astral travel, they have the ability for shape shifting, which gives them that that method that they use to drain energy, from their victims during that time, if you want to use the term victims or hosts or anything like that. Of course, the shape that they go ahead and take during that time can mean a lot of things as well. So there are some books that do talk about that, and some don't. So it's kind of like just kind of like hit or miss, I guess, in that type of sense. And then, of course, dream work is probably the more difficult one that some people may or may not end up developing. So just to be very clear regarding like a lot of these techniques that the books talk about, most people that pursue or even add vampiric practices to what they're already practicing are going to end up developing like a general repertoire, a combination of some of those, either touch, touch draining, tendril draining, vicinity draining, stuff like that. Again, the astral work is going to be kind of like hit or miss for a lot of people, just because it does take a lot of time to develop and to perfect. And as far as dream work goes, there's going to be far few more people that actually are able to master the dream work aspect in order to do their work as opposed to others. Again, just because of the level of undertaking that is required, as well as practice that in amount of energy that's required in order to develop that skill. But I just want to go ahead and say, of course, flat out, if you actually do pursue this type of practice, do not go into this practice with a light heart. Okay, Vampire Magick is not going to be for your average occult practitioner. The person that is usually drawn to this type of practice is they feel like they actually have a calling for it. Okay. It's not like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and practice Vampire Magick. It's not going to be something like that. In and of itself, Vampire Magick is a practice that actually consists of spiritual predatory aspects. Okay. And this isn't to say that you just simply go around stealing energy from people, unsuspecting people day in and day out. Okay, we do have to take care of our own actions. We do have to, of course, be responsible for our actions, and we do understand that by crossing certain boundaries, we may end up inciting chaos and even certain reprisals from groups or individuals by doing so. A Vampire Magick practitioner will always remain in the boundaries of the laws that govern the area in which they reside. Obviously, if you live in the United States, you want to obviously abide by certain laws. And most notably, a vampire will never directly attack another vampire openly or willingly. It's just generally kind of like in a code of ethics. Okay. Vampire Magick is very, despite what some books will end up mentioning, and I'll end up getting that into like my last review more than anything, are actually heavily influenced on Luciferianism, actually. Okay. Vampire Magick is very transgressive. It liberates the mind from moral and ethical concerns. The practitioner does gain strengthening of will, philosophical transformation, self-mastery through his techniques and teachings, and accelerates personal apotheosis. For those of us who don't know what apotheosis is, it means transcendence to personal godhood, which is more or less like a left-hand path perspective. Most notably, groups of occult practitioners that may be drawn to this practice will be those already embracing certain or specific other practices, such as necromancy, for instance. Through their understanding of necromantic rites and grave work and death magic, necromancers are quite possibly are able to, probably the most logical choice for them would be to pick up a type of Vampire Magick to add to their already existing repertoire. It's just kind of like, I don't want to say it's like a necessity, but it's kind of like just like another level of their magic. It makes sense to them in order to practice it. Okay, although not all necromancers do practice Vampire Magick. Okay, if you're already an occult practitioner and do spiritual work with, say, Lilith or Lucifer, Samael, Tiamat, Nemea, Kranzan, Kali, Hecate, Then, of course, you may also want to consider adding vampire magic practices to your studies, simply because all of these left-hand path deities, in and of themselves, are already vampires. Yes, Tiamat, who is a dragon, is actually a vampire. Um, Again, we know Lilith is already a vampire. Samael is a vampire. Hecate, and there's many more. Asmodee is a vampire as well. There's lots of spirits that are, particularly in the left hand path, that are already vampires. And by adding, of course, this practice to your study already, it will, of course, help to increase the type of spiritual work that you'll be doing with these beings. And by doing so, you are able to, may even be able to learn additional areas of vampire magic that are not already known by the masses by working with these deities in that level or that area of expertise. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the first book here, and we are talking about Energy Magic of the Vampire: Secret Techniques for Personal Power and Manifestation by Webb. Okay, this book is published by Inner Traditions in June of 2021. The book does measure 6 inches by 9 inches, consists of 352 pages, and is available in both Kindle and paper format. The book does share a variety of techniques for manifestation methods and how to utilize and store energy you've collected in practice. The book also discusses familiars and servitudes in vampire magic, how to use them, how to create them, egregores such as and other such beings. Also with vampire practices across other traditions, it covers areas such as runework, sex magic, thelema, and other traditions, and how vampires and vampire magic has been influenced by those traditions, and also includes some healing practices. Webb, in and of himself, is a master of the Order of the Vampire within the Temple of Set. Here, the author does share a 9-month process to awaken and initiate you as a vampire, and allows you to actualize your hidden potential. In all, it was a pretty good book, personally for myself. I did like some of the information that the author provided. Of course, it wasn't my top pick, unfortunately. This was one of the runner-ups, but it is like one of the better of the runner-ups that I actually ended up choosing. All right, on to book 2. We are talking about the Infernal Vampire Handbook by D.H. Thorne. Independently published in August of 2020. This book does consist of 164 pages, measures 6 inches by 9 inches, and is available in Kindle and paper format. D.H. Thorne has been involved with the Left Hand Path community for many, many years now, already known for some of his other works, such as Become the Maelstrom and the Shadownomicon. The author does take the reader through understanding what vampirism is, and how it works. The book does detail a variety of essential practices, ritual work, energy manipulation, and more. Okay, for the size of the book, it does provide a good amount of information and a good starting point for any reader looking into vampire magic practices. He does get into a variety of feeding methods, including physical touch feeding, tendrils, using the use of pranic breath, astral attacks, directing your attention to the chakras and energy centers, and other areas of the body. Again, very good book. In and of itself, is actually complete. It does have some ritual work in the end there, and it does allow you to do some work with Lilith and perform a type of initiation at the end of the book. By all means, it is one that I would suggest into looking into. It does lack in some other areas, such as other rituals and other practices, but again, still a decent book in order to look into, just to get an idea of the practice. So I do recommend that one. All right, and for the last book on the runner-up list, we are talking about the Vampire Codex 20th Anniversary Edition by Michelle Belanger, published by Create Space Independent Publishing Platform in October of 2014. The book does contain over 150 pages, does measure 6 inches by 9 inches, and is available in paper format only. Okay, the book is really more of a primer of sorts, is kind of like what I gathered from the book. The 20th Anniversary Edition, originally penned in 1994, it does contain annotated copies of the author's original work and development of the Keprian vampire system. Holy smokes, excuse me. The Vampire Codex is thought to be the backbone of some other vampiric systems and orders that are in existence today. Notably that I guess it's mentioned once or twice in the book that portions of this work has been cited over the years in a variety of internet groups known for vampire practices, and certain things have been changed around. So whether or not that's actually true, that's I don't know. But there are authors that have been writing on vampire practices and vampiric magic longer than, like before 1994, and actually the actual idea of vampire magic is not really a new thing. It's actually been around for centuries. It's just a matter that some people are kind of picking it up once again, more or less. I'll kind of get into a little bit of history on vampire magic at some other time, but ever since the idea of vampires have been in folklore and folk tales, there's more or less been a type of vampire magic system out there. And again, it's been getting tapped into little over the last 120 years or so. And again, I'll get into that in another discussion. Okay, but this book does discuss heavily on the notion that people of this path, vampirism, need to be awakened in order for one to understand their true nature and potential. That seems to be a very common theme throughout the book that discusses how people are needing to experience this awakening in order for them to understand their true nature as a vampire. And this does come with being introduced into it in a variety of ways. The author also describes the subculture as a group of close-knit people banding together in community. The bottom of, more or less, there seems to be kind of like a hierarchy or a social structure within the group. The bottom part of the community, making up the largest portion, are roughly known as concubines. And these are generally people again, the lowest part of the hierarchy, that sometimes are made up of individuals that have not been fully awakened yet, though they're kind of like used as feeders, if that's like, the way that the way to describe it. In other words, like other people feed on they allow other people to feed on them in order to satiate their energy needs. With warriors being, that's actually the term that she used in the book, warriors being kind of like the middle class or protectors of the community, and finally the upper class being priests or priestesses for the community. Unfortunately, when I read that part of the book, I immediately thought of something like, it's like, okay, these people are LARPing, it's like, live action role playing for vampires is kind of like the idea that I thought. But the idea that, that you have these people in a type of subculture that are kind of viewed in a very negative way, that they would go ahead and privatize their community from outsiders and prying eyes to what, and the uninitiated as to like what they do in their particular lifestyle. It does kind of make sense that I suppose there would be a type of social structure there. Again, I'm not accusing them of LARPing or anything like that, but that's kind of like what the idea that I got in my mind. But it is a community organization in a sense. So, you don't see people going out there and talking about being a vampire on a regular basis, Now, the one thing that I did that did stand out for me in this book with the author was notes regarding feeding through energy centers and the chakras themselves, with the most common being throat, heart, solar plexus, and the sex chakra. One thing that the author did take special care in this book was to describe the amount of care that should be used when an individual is feeding off of somebody else, and particularly the throat and the heart and the solar plexus. The throat and the solar plexus, if too much energy is drained away, people have known to have convulsions and have other health-related issues that can materialize by having these points being drawn off of too much, especially or too quickly, as well as draining from the heart chakra should be approached, as she says, with extreme caution, as too much energy drained from there can create possible problems such as stroke, heart attack, and even death in that type of sense. So, just to note, and I thought that was kind of interesting because that was the only book that actually described in that. When you read other books, they talk about going ahead and draining energy from those points and how to do it, and in some cases, when to avoid doing it and when not. But she was the actual only one that went ahead and described the downside to doing it, or doing it too much or too frequently, what can happen. Now, points on the wrists and behind the knees can be utilized, of course, though she did state that little satiation is gained from these points in the body, and can often be used by newcomers to the community as a means to prime them, or as a means for them to taste or partake in a way in order to help awaken them. And a note on draining energy from the sex chakra. This energy drawn from that area is, in a sense, kind of limitless in a way, and this really doesn't affect the person in any ill way. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with its location in the body to the basic chakra, which is, actually the root area where your chi or your energy comes from. She does make suggestion that draining energy from the sex chakra through sex magic practices is actually very sound for that. So that is something that can be utilized at a point. And I mean, of course, by sex magic practices, we are talking about fellatio and cunnilingus, of course. So that's not unheard of. Still, the book does lack a good deal regarding techniques, and does fail to explain how to gather, manipulate, and utilize energy for practical and ritual work. For that, the practitioner would obviously have to look into other books, either by the author, such as like the Psychic Energy Codex, a manual for developing your subtle senses, or the Vampire Ritual book, or you would have to look into other Vampire Magic practices books. So, as I said, this book is kind of more of like a primer. It does talk about a few things here and there, but doesn't go too far into actual practices and anything like that. And with that, that's going to be my 3 books on the runner-up list. Let's go ahead and finish this out, and then we're going to get into our number 1 candidate, and I will see you in just a few moments in the next video.